What is the most reported crime in Didcot?
The most reported crime in Didcot is the same as it is the most reported crime in most parts of Thames Valley and indeed across the country. Sadly, it's domestic abuse. So it's not the thing that people will think of off the top of their list because it goes on behind closed doors. But sadly, it probably makes up about 25% or so of most officers day shifts will be dealing with domestic abuse in some form or other.
When you say domestic abuse, is that arguments happening in homes, or is it more than that?
The definition of domestic abuse does cover a whole range of things these days. So I think there's a much better understanding of things like coercive control. So it might not be, when I say domestic abuse, people often think of domestic violence, someone being beaten. There are lots of other ways in which abusive partners can abuse their other halves. But absolutely, a lot of what the police will deal with may well be a family dispute, and whilst I think it's really good that people are more confident in coming forward and reporting some of those things that are happening, undoubtedly we also are seeing people much more willing to call the police if there is a disagreement of some kind, and that's what makes it really challenging for the police, in that when they go into that situation at 2 o'clock in the morning when you've got two adults who are arguing with each other and it can be literally he said, she said, police officers have got to try and assess that with often very little background to it and try and determine who's done something, are there grounds to arrest someone? Because in the past, those cases have been dismissed all too easily. And it can be very easy to say, well, this is really complicated, you just need to sort it out amongst yourselves. But I think the police are very aware of, we've seen plenty of tragedies in the past, that actually if you walk away from that situation, the next call could be because someone's been killed at the extreme end. So it makes domestic abuse not just one of the biggest volume crimes that the police have to deal with, but also in many ways one of the most complex because it's down to what's happening behind closed doors.
In terms of how many women are suffering it, have you got a figure for that?
So I think some of the stats I've heard is that about 1 in 5 people will be affected by domestic abuse in some way or another. That's men and women. It's disproportionately, of course, largely women, but there will be men who will be victims as well, and a significant number of those who will be children, either child victims of domestic abuse or child witnesses. And the laws thankfully changed relatively recently, so we can now provide a bit more support to children who perhaps haven't been a direct victim themselves, but if you grow up in an abusive home, you're still impacted by it. And I think understanding that impact is really important.
So are we basically saying then that one of our neighbours is probably suffering from domestic abuse?
Yeah, I think there's a really good chance of it, frankly. And I think what we also need to recognise is, because I don't want to catastrophise about this, those numbers are really scary. I don't think it's the fact that we've had this massive explosion of domestic abuse and that the world is much more dangerous for women in particular than it was previously. There's a lot of statistics that suggest actually the world is becoming a lot safer. But what we are doing is talking about it. And I think I've mentioned before, there was a lady I talked to who was in her 80s who was just disclosing the fact she'd been a victim of domestic abuse all of her married life. The only reason she was telling anybody was because her husband had just died. And she'd had 60-odd years of abuse. This has been going on for generations and generations, but we're doing something about it now.
What other big problems do you think there are in Didcot?
We definitely see issues around antisocial behaviour. I know that's something you've talked about on the podcast before. Again, that's not unique to Didcot or the surrounding area. There's some generational issues in there, of the stuff that kids have always been kids and caused a few issues, but we need to make sure it doesn't spill over into the sort of wider threats and criminality that people are concerned about. And I think one of the other areas that actually we're making some good progress on but remains an issue is things like shoplifting. That traditional acquisitive crime that while the police have had a much better focus on things like domestic abuse, which are those hidden crimes, the if you like, the traditional stuff that people might think of, vehicle crime, shoplifting, they remain an issue. Now, most of those neighbourhood crimes are heading in the right direction. Burglary is really low. The vehicle crime is falling across Thames Valley, but it's still, one incident is more than I would like. So we need to make sure that we're always vigilant. And shoplifting is a really good example of how reporting makes a big difference to allowing the police to get on top of it.
Is, for example, banging on people's doors and making them feel scared a crime?
We've seen a lot of this sort of shared on local Facebook groups of late. And I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it? That it will very much depend on the circumstances. So there may well be some criminal damage involved in that. There may well be some harassment offences, certainly if it's a repeat target at an individual. At the extreme end, yes, there are definitely criminal offences potentially in there. Equally, plenty of generations will have played knock and run in some form or other, and of course the difference now is we're capturing it all on Ring doorbells and sharing it widely. So I think there's a need to sometimes step back a little bit and look at individual cases rather than the generality and say that's some bad behaviour where parents need to take a bit of responsibility about what's going on. This is serious criminality where we need to get people arrested by the police for what they're doing, and there's a whole range of that stuff out there.
What about children hanging around outside cafes and restaurants and places in Didcot and making people feel intimidated because they're in big groups?
This is always one of those challenges, and it's why the solutions to some of these problems aren't just about policing. It's about working with some of the youth groups like the Train, who are doing some really good stuff. Of course, if people are behaving badly, we need to try and tackle that behaviour. But there's also a bit of a risk that people can just be intimidated by a large group of young people. And if that was a large group of middle-aged people, perhaps we wouldn't be quite as concerned about them. So we need to respect these are individuals. And if they're behaving well, then we shouldn't be concerned about it. But if they're behaving badly, then there should be some consequences for that in the same way as anybody else. And that's why reporting things that are happening to the police really makes a difference. Even if it doesn't get a blue light response there and then, it's about identifying who are the troublemakers in that group who are perhaps causing things to escalate a little bit, and then working with organisations like the Train, working with schools to try and head some of that off, because the criminal justice sanctions that the police have got probably aren't the right approach. We can all feel that some 14 and 15-year-old kids are badly behaving a little bit. Do we want them sent to prison for 6 months for kicking balls against a wall? Probably not. But do we want the proverbial clip round the ear, taken home to your parents, have a word with you, what's going on, find out what's going on at school, try and get people back on the straight and narrow? I think that's the sort of policing people really want to see.
Do you think there's enough police on the streets to be able to make people feel safe?
We'd always like more. Across Thames Valley, we've got more police officers than we've ever had before, and we're putting more into neighbourhood policing. So there is always that balance to get right. So I'm really keen. We're applying to the Home Office for more funding this year to put more neighbourhood officers. So the neighbourhood policing teams are those officers who will be out and about being proactive. So they're the ones who can patrol around the town centre, go around the Orchard Centre, but not just that, be seen in the estates, do the engagement with schools. So the really proactive stuff. So yes, we've got more of those now, and I want to continue to grow those numbers. Will we ever have enough to satisfy everybody's demand? Probably not. You can put a police officer on every corner and someone will still say, I haven't seen the police around here. But there is also a challenge that the police have rightly got to balance, is while on behalf of the public I will always push for those neighbourhood officers, as I said, 25% of calls to the police will be from domestic abuse. Those will be response officers going to that 999 call to deal with the issue there and then. There will be lots of other crimes and incidents that the police need to respond to quickly, and we need to have resources to do that whilst not taking people off the streets who are doing the local neighbourhood work. So in terms of absolute numbers, I want Thames Valley Police to continue to grow, and ideally I want it to continue to grow at pace with our population. That's going to be a challenge given some of the financial challenges we've got, but certainly at the moment neighbourhood policing is growing and it is heading in the right direction.
I mean, I've lived in Didcot about 14 years now, frequently go to Great Western Park, the Orchard Centre, Lady Grove. I don't remember ever seeing a Bobby on the beat, if you like.
Well, Didcot's a big place, and the absolute numbers are still small if you look at the thousands of people who live in Didcot. But when I go into town, I do see officers out and about, and I spend some time with them as well. And obviously, a lot of it's about where they're engaging. So I talked about the schools, and police officers in Didcot will spend quite a lot of time in and with the schools, spend time with the kids who are at Train. They will get to know the people that you and I don't necessarily want to know. I think one of the comments I remember for one of your previous podcasts is that the local Bobby who knows everybody in the town. Well, do you know what? I'm always really impressed when I speak to police officers. They do know the people in Didcot and the surrounding area, but they're the people that you and I probably wouldn't want to know. They know those people who've got bail conditions. They know those people who are persistent offenders. If there's an issue, they probably know who's responsible and whose parents to go and talk to. So actually, I think police officers on the ground do know their communities quite well, but with a growing town, the good law-abiding folk probably don't have a lot of contact with the police. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but increasing that visibility does definitely increase trust.
Would you like to see more police on the streets?
I would. I don't want to see police officers on the streets standing around doing nothing just to be visible to placate people. What I think is really important is using the information we've got to make sure police officers are out and about in the right places at the right times. So there's some merit in having police officers being seen to reassure people, but actually if they're just out and about in places where there's no crime happening because there's lots of people, that will reassure, but it won't actually reduce crime. And what you're seeing is increased police effectiveness. So we're seeing crime falling, but we're seeing more arrests being made and more crimes being solved. And those local neighbourhood officers, they should be the ones out nicking people. I don't want neighbourhood officers just to be there for show and to do the nice community engagement. Don't go and talk to people at the school gate just because it's good to remind people you're there. Talk to people at the school gate to find out which routes it is they don't want to walk home because they don't feel safe. Find out what's really going on the ground. Find out who the bad people are in Didcot and go and nick them. And that's what the neighbourhood teams are doing. So when they're not always in the town centre, it's very possibly because they're arresting someone and booking them into custody. And frankly, I'm really comfortable with that because we want crime to fall.
People recording things on their Ring doorbells or on their mobile phones, is that something you encourage?
So I think my when I use Facebook, if you could have a sort of frequently used comment just to auto type, it's have you reported this to the police, which I seem to put on just about every comment I see. I think they're clearly Ring doorbells, mobile phone footage, dash cams, really helpful, gather a huge amount of evidence in terms of supporting prosecution. So one, arguably a very good thing. Putting it on your local Facebook group to warn other people about what's going on, no problem with that. But don't stop there. Report it to the police because I get really frustrated. There'll be plenty of times when Thames Valley Police get things wrong or don't do the job they should do, and it's my responsibility to hold the force to account for doing that. But what I can't do is criticise the police for not acting on something if they haven't been told about it. So if you've got some doorbell footage of someone coming around kicking your door, and I've seen some of that in Didcot recently, if you've got some footage of someone stealing a parcel off your doorstep, those sorts of things, send it to the police. Don't expect a blue light response there and then to have a cop and knock on your door to take a statement because it's not needed. But the intelligence is really useful, and the only way we'll identify the person who's going around nicking the parcels off people's doorsteps is if we get all that intelligence in. It might be that your footage doesn't have a clear shot of someone's face, but it identifies their clothing, and your neighbour 200 yards down had exactly the same thing happen, and they've got a beautiful image. So actually, if we can join that intelligence up, it's exactly what those local neighbourhood teams should be doing. But if we don't get people to report it, then the police can't do anything. The easiest way is to go to thamesvalley.police.uk, and there's a report button on there. You can put in all the details that you've got around the incident, and if you've got some footage, you can be sent a link to upload that footage directly to the police. That'll be that's then stored in an evidential form. So if it ends up going to court, you can demonstrate to the court it hasn't been fiddled with in between, etc. So that's the easiest way to do it. You can also call it in on 101. That's the non-emergency number. Now, a lot of people have in the past felt that number's too slow and it's taken too long to get through. And that's absolutely true. The average time for January and February for calls to 101 was down to 1 minute and 15 seconds. And I guess the other thing is to say, if it's happening now, and it's not just 999 isn't just for emergencies. Clearly, if there's an emergency, someone's life at stake, people will generally go 999. But actually, if you see someone breaking into a car or there's someone committing shoplifting right now, call 999. The fact that you might not think it's the most serious crime doesn't matter. It's happening now. That emergency response could make all the difference to catching someone. It's happened 10 minutes ago, then fine, do it on 101. But I think people shouldn't be concerned about using 999 for the right reasons. Has
there been a significant increase in the amount of people sending that sort of footage and reporting those sort of incidents because of Ring doorbells and mobile phones, etc.?
We see a bit of an increase. I think the problem is that there's still a little bit of a reluctance to actually take that extra step and report it to the police. There's often what's the point? Nobody will do anything. I'll guarantee the stuff they won't do anything about is the stuff that isn't reported. We maybe need to make it a little bit easier. In an ideal world, I would like to go to a place where you could use things like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp to report intelligence in. It might not be a crime report. If your car's been stolen, you probably need a proper contact with the police to get all the details. But actually, if you just want to share some local community intelligence, if you've seen something that doesn't look right, if we could take that through some of those social media routes, I think that would be making it a lot easier for people. And that probably risks the police being inundated with stuff, which is a nice problem to have in some ways. What we have seen, for example, on shoplifting is we've made it a lot easier for retailers to report shoplifting. We know it was a problem. We know there was a lack of confidence in, are the police going to do anything about it? and we provided a new app which makes it easier for retailers to share their CCTV directly with the police. Since we've done that in the last year, we've seen recorded shoplifting go through the roof, which I think is really good because we knew it was under-recorded and we're now getting those reports in. But at the same time, that's meant the police have doubled the number of charges for shoplifting. So in each local area, there's the top 20 known shoplifters, and most of those are now in prison as a result of that increased reporting. So it does have an effect that, yes, we've seen recorded crime go up. Do you know what? I'm not looking for good statistics. I want to know what's really going on out there. If that means the numbers go up, that's fine. What it's enabled the police to do is make more arrests. So actually, that's the virtuous circle that we need to get into. So if there's issues that people have got around some of the antisocial behaviour and they've got some Ring doorbell footage, you can go to the Thames Valley Police website. You can report and share things through there. I think there's things we can do to make the system a little bit easier to use in the future, but ultimately the system's there for you if you want to report it.
In the wake of safeguarding issues at Didcot Girls' School, are our children safe?
I think people should feel that their children are safe, and I think the evidence is that they are safe. And we, the police need to work with schools to make sure that continues to be the case. I think there are lots of issues around children and phones and impacts of social media. I think there's a danger about some of the stuff that comes out of adolescence that we allow an interesting and potentially insightful fictional drama to lead public policy. There are definitely some issues in there. There's a whole load of other real world problems that we need to properly look at and understand that are affecting young people in Didcot and across the country. But there is work that the police will do with children and with schools around knife crime, drugs, sharing of images. I think that's one of the most interesting areas actually. Sharing of images is probably one of the biggest risks to young people, and we often think of it as your predatory paedophile preying on young children. The majority of those sexual offences cases with indecent images are peer on peer. They're one child to another. So that may be shared in what someone thinks is a consensual way to start with, and then it's shared on to other people. That's one of those dangers that I think the police and schools need to be very much aware of. So I think we need to recognise that children are growing up in the same world, but with the technology enabling things differently. I don't think childhood is fundamentally different from what it always was, but the technology allows some of that contact to be more rapid, to be more intimate in the case of some of those images. So we need to recognise those changes. The police have got a role in that. Schools have got a role in that, but ultimately parents have got a big role. And there's a lot of work we do in schools with children, which is really important and we should continue doing. I also think we need to do more with parents, because children are really easy to get to, because children that are in school are literally a captive audience during school hours, and we can send a police officer and we can give them a nice talk and they can go home again. Parents are much more difficult to engage with, and frankly, how you get to the parents who aren't engaging is even more problematic. I think if you talk to any parent, any teacher, the parents who turn up to parents' evening are probably not the ones that they're most concerned about. It's the parents that don't even go to the parents' evening, where those children will potentially be underperforming. There might be some good reasons for that parents need additional support, but actually they're the ones that I'm most concerned about. And when I talk about knife crime, which thankfully in our part of Oxfordshire hasn't been a significant issue and is falling across Thames Valley, but I've spoken to too many parents who've lost children as a result of knife crime. Every parent says to me, I'm really concerned about my child going to school because they might be a victim of knife crime. I don't think I've ever had a parent say to me, but I'm really worried that my child is the one who's carrying a knife. That's the bit that we need to be perhaps a little bit more self-critical and a little bit more aware of what our children are up to. Because for every child that is a victim of some sort of sexting, of some sort of knife crime, of some sort of assault at school, there's another child who's the perpetrator often. And where are their parents in that conversation?
So what do we do as parents? What's the best thing we can do?
I think it is difficult, and I've got two young children. I don't claim that it's always easy, but I think it is about responsibility of parents. What we can do as schools and police is to perhaps make parents aware of what some of the risks are. So a little bit of education of parents, particularly around children who might be suffering exploitation. They might be getting involved with gangs or county lines. Some of those issues. What to look out for? Is your child being more secretive about the messages that they've got. And that can be difficult to judge because teenagers will just start to be a bit more secretive. That's part of being a teenager, isn't it? But, have they suddenly getting expensive goods that can't be explained? Are they hanging around with different people? Are they keeping stranger hours? That sort of thing that might be a bit of a concern. But I guess that's just watching children grow up and being aware of what's happening. But ultimately, I think there is a big responsibility for parents. There's a lot of talk at the moment about banning phones in schools. I don't think you should need legislation for that. I think schools ought to be able to manage that discipline in schools. And if the head teacher, as I think most head teachers should and would, say, when you get here in the morning, your phone goes away unless you've got a very good reason, that should be for the school to manage. But when parents talk about how difficult it is around social media, of course there's social pressures and nobody wants their child to be the one that's left out. But parents are buying their children expensive mobile phones. They're paying the bill every month for the mobile phones. Parents have got a responsibility to control what children have got access to. Now, of course, that's not easy within their, in their own bedrooms and in their own space. But life isn't easy when you're bringing up children. I've got 2 children myself. I try and keep a pretty close eye certainly on what our eldest is up to online and maintaining that relationship about, what she's telling me that she's seeing, but making sure the parental controls are in place so that they can't access some of the things that you would be really concerned about, and just keeping an eye on what they're doing in the online world in the same way as hopefully you would do in the real world.
Do you think children should be allowed to carry their mobile phones on them during the school day? Personally,
no. I think there are potentially some good reasons. Some children will use them for monitoring health conditions, etc. So there may well be some exceptions, but certainly my eldest will get to school, will hand her phone in at the start of the day, will get the phone back at the end, so you can contact parents if you need to about lifts home or that safe journey to and from school. But actually, while you're in that school environment, you're there to learn. And I think generally I can't see a good reason why children would have it. It gets more complex when the schools are using those devices for learning, etc. So that's part of the reason why I don't think we probably should legislate about it. I'm not someone who thinks that we should have a law for everything. But what we should do is expect for our head teachers that they will have a rigid sense of discipline within their schools. And I think part of that is access to phones.
You mentioned about the sharing of indecent images of children. Is that happening in Didcot?
I think it will happen everywhere. It will happen in what many people will think of as a consensual way between boyfriends and girlfriends. And then sadly, some of those individuals will share it on in a way that, you heard the phrase like revenge porn, some of those things. I think it is sadly much more common for young people to think it's normal to share intimate images of themselves with their friends. Effectively, of course, recognising that once it's out there, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and they can cause huge harm in the future.
Matthew, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been really interesting speaking to you and hearing all about everything that's happening in Didcot. We really appreciate your time on the Didcot podcast.
It's a pleasure. Great to talk to you.